Okay, and we're going to have another take on protecting freshwater wetlands from Brian Frank. He's a planner with the town of East Hampton. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to CTUC again for hosting this very important event. This is about East Hampton's wetland regulatory program. But before we get into it, wetlands mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's a very broad term. And when I was doing this, I was wondering if everybody wrote down the type of wetland that first came to mind by the word wetland, how many different habitats would be represented by the people in this room. There are all different types. They're classified by their vegetation type, their water regime, their acidity, a host of other parameters. There are a slew of them that are described in the Ecological Communities of New York, which is still a fantastic publication. The second edition is, I think, in 2014. And we have a lot of those habitats on Long Island, including East Hampton. They're generally lumped together as, or sorted in the biggest categories as either swamps, marshes, or bogs, and there are a few examples here. This is a red maple swamp in Northwest Woods. Oop, pointer's not pointing, that's okay. The middle picture is a cranberry bog in Napeague. You can see that's the cranberries flowering. And to the right, you probably can't tell, but all of that purple flower is a salt marsh fleabane from a brackish marsh in Napeague as well. I mentioned, I underscored brief in the overview of the importance of wetlands because we could spend the rest of the day just talking about how important they are, including to us. Ecosystem services are what wetlands do for us. So this is a room of conservationists that appreciate habitats for their natural value. But if you want to be a little anthropocentric and say, what's in it for me? They trap pollutants, they hold floodwaters and help protect private property from flooding and coastal erosion. They provide nurseries for a ton of commercially important species, and they have a lot of recreational values that often help contribute to property values, a sense of place, and support resort economies. But as a habitat, they are special. And I think everybody knows that here. If you didn't, after just a few of the talks that you heard this morning, you probably know that now. Among the most productive and biodiverse in the world, 40% of all plant and wildlife species, and about half of federally threatened or endangered species are wetland dependent. I want to go back for a minute. Believe it or not, this is a cranberry bog in Amagansett, very flooded, obviously. There's over a foot of standing water in here. This happens to be a location of a pretty good, reliable breeding area for spadefoot toad, which is another species that utilizes wetlands frequently. Just to continue with their wetland value, and I think this kind of was emphasized by some of those earlier presentations that you heard today. A lot of the species that are wetland dependent spend a significant portion of their lives in the uplands around them. I can't emphasize enough that you can't just protect the wetlands. We need to, as much as possible, protect the upland areas around them. And this is especially true on Long Island, where vernal pools have traditionally been some of the most vulnerable types of wetlands to be developed. I was happy to see somebody else put spotted turtle in their slide show. Thank you to SOFO for the turtle, because they're not always associated with vernal pools, but they do have to come out of their standing water, out of their wetland habitats to breed. And I wanted to include a ribbon snake just because the swamps of Montauk, the Black Tupelo swamps of Montauk, is really the most reliable place that I've ever seen ribbon snakes in my professional career. They don't always look like wetlands, and I think that point has been made clear too. This is a vernal pool in East Hampton. This is early enough in the season. You can tell that things haven't leafed out entirely. There's still a decent amount of standing water here. This has been a pretty reliable wood frog breeding pond for a long time. I haven't had an opportunity to check it in recent years. I hope it still is. But this is the type of area that by July and August, the water dries up. It's in a depression, so sometimes the leaves blow in, and it doesn't necessarily look that different from the woods around it to the untrained eye. And this is exactly the type of area that without some type of wetland protection would get filled and developed for something depending on the land use or zoning if it's privately owned. And it is important to conserve what's left because we've lost a lot. Historically, wetlands were not appreciated. They were considered wastelands, and there were incentives to turn them into productive lands. The dredging of coastal wetlands continued well into the mid-20th century, even beyond that. Probably didn't slow measurably until the federal environmental regulations of the early 1970s. Probably 110 million acres have been lost. That's more than half. And wetland losses still continue. Despite the advances and the appreciation that we have, the Fish and Wildlife Service still does their status and trends report every 10 years. It is an excellent publication. The most recent one covered the period of 2009 to 2019. And there's a ton of great information in there. It breaks it down regionally, the types of wetlands that have been lost. There have been a couple of gains, so there's a little bit of a silver lining, but the losses still continue. In New York, they're primarily regulated by the DEC, especially on Long Island. The Army Corps of Engineers do regulate some wetlands, but they have traditionally had to been linked to the waters of the United States through the federal the Army Corps' Section 404 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. And the waters of the United States, it seems that for the entire length of my career, has been contested in federal courts to try to redefine what counts as the water of the United States, specifically to try to reduce the protection of the federal protection for wetlands. We have to know where they are if we're going to protect them. It should be obvious. There are federal maps. We haven't talked about the National Wetland Inventory maps today at all. They're an excellent resource. So are the state wetland maps. But there are limitations to them, and there always have been. Kevin mentioned in his presentation, they're not always great at picking up small wetlands. That's true about the federal maps also, especially narrow or linear wetlands. And wetlands that don't contain standing water through a long enough time in the year to really make them obvious on aerial photographs. And they're at a scale that you can't use to measure the distance from them. You need on-site identification. And that's where wetland delineation programs come in. Wetland delineation is even more important, I think, on freshwater wetlands because at least in tidal wetlands, you can follow the water source back to the headwaters a little bit and kind of keep track of them that way. But you probably got the idea by now that freshwater wetlands can be geographically isolated enough that you might not know where to look for them or where to inspect them. And this is where I think the town of East Hampton's wetland program has complemented the state programs significantly. East Hampton is, if anybody doesn't know, it's the eastern tip of Long Island on the South Fork. It's basically a peninsula on the island. You saw Kevin's map of urban areas just a few minutes ago. And for a number of reasons, East Hampton escaped the urbanization to date the western part of the island has experienced, and therefore has a lot of natural areas. There's been a proactive conservation program there for a long time. A lot of subdivisions recognize the wetlands and cluster development away from them. There's a lot of open space, and there's a terrific trail system. There are a variety of wetland types in East Hampton. There are about 6 major harbors along the north shore of the town and some additional smaller harbors. They all have significant freshwater wetland components that are intact in their headwaters. We have coastal plain ponds, we have coastal salt ponds, we have interdunal swales, Kettle Hole wetlands in Northwest and Amagansett. It's really a terrific place for naturalists if you can stand the traffic to get there and get out of there. But it is worth it. Make some time. Sometime if you're in your career or your life, if you're a naturalist or an aspiring naturalist, it is a heck of a place to visit, whether you're a birder, a herper, or just a hiker. This, by the way, well, you get the idea. This is an Accabonac salt marsh on the left and a Tupelo swamp. I believe this one is in Northwest Woods, but it might be in Montauk. And I was impressed to see that East Hampton's wetlands were recognized for a long time. I was surprised to find this publication that went all the way back to 1965. It doesn't even look like environmental was in the name of the Conservation Department yet, but there is a lot there's a lot of good information here. This is a little booklet. It's quaint. It's not as technical as you might expect, but a lot of the information that they talked about, the value of wetlands and the description of these habitats in 1965 are equally valid today. It did recommend reducing, if not eliminating, the use of DDT. So fortunately, that one's not applicable anymore. The program that we have right now was developed in 1984 as part of the Natural Resource Special Permit program. It includes tidal freshwater wetlands. It also includes some coastal habitats, dunes, bluffs, and the back dune areas. We have minimum setbacks for structure, sanitary system, and clearing. Setbacks are one of the most important tools in protecting wetlands, and maybe there'll be some time for me to discuss that at the end in a little bit more detail. The program has been administered by the Town Planning Department since the early 1990s. The town adopted wetland definitions in that 1984 code. They were developed by unfortunately, the recently late naturalist, Larry Penny, the town's first environmental protection director. And there's a general wetland definition, which I put up on the screen. There are also specific definitions for tidal and freshwater wetlands that I was always impressed by their articulation because it predated what really became the industry standard with the 87, often referred to as the 87 manual, the Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual, which I could geek out for the rest of the day, but I promise you I won't. It standardized the criteria for classifying wetlands and making a criteria to determine where their boundaries are, and having a boundary from the wetland to measure your buffers, your conservation areas, your setbacks is crucial. I'm still amazed that one document was able to cover the entire country. Think of just how different the wetlands in the southwestern portion of the United States are from the northeast or the southeast or the prairie pothole region in the Midwest, and you can tell I like the 87 manual. And it can be used for tidal wetland delineations. You don't always need it, but the technical criteria, which I didn't get into today, of hydrophytic vegetation, hydric soils, and wetland hydrology can be applied in all of the wetland types that we've seen. The DEC introduced their wetland manual in 1995. It was specifically developed for freshwater wetlands. It's also excellent. The content is very similar to the federal manual. It's a little bit more streamlined. It only has to apply to New York as opposed to the entire country. And the criteria is nearly identical. Here are the two definitions of a wetland side by side. It's hard to say if anything substantive is lost by DEC's, the definition they use for freshwater wetlands in the 95 manual. The town, we have been applying the definition of wetlands consistent with those state and federal guidelines for as long as I've been with the town. The wetland boundaries that the town flags are usually used by the DEC in their regulatory program when they know about them. If a local jurisdiction was considering adopting wetland regulations now, which isn't a bad idea, I would encourage looking at either the state or the federal definition, just because it's a little bit more modern and a little bit more technical. I do think there is value to any local jurisdiction having dedicated staff to look for wetlands, delineate wetlands, and review the applications associated with them, to provide a little continuity in having the same people going out on a regular basis. Getting familiar with these areas. You're going to see things at different time of year. We're not going to find a lot of royal fern if we do a wetland flagging in March. We're not going to find anything right now with all the snow that we have, but there's a lot of wetland vegetation that's not persistent, and being there at the right time is probably one of the best ways to get documentation of where these ephemeral species are located. If in-house staffing is not an option, you could contract with a firm. I think East Hampton Village does that for their wetland delineation program. But the most important point that I want to hammer home is getting the conservation, especially of these smaller or isolated wetlands, get them on the map. They are indispensable as wetland refugia and wildlife corridors, and the values that I mentioned in the earlier part of my discussion. I wanted to share just an example of one. This is an interdoodle swale wetland that is small, but it's not that small. It's about 4,500 square feet of surface area. It's irregularly shaped. It varies in width from as narrow as 30 feet. It's about 120 feet long. It's not captured by either of the mapping programs. And it's basically a cranberry bog. A lot of large cranberry in the wetland itself, but also in there are really, some spectacular species. You see the threadleaf sundew on the left, the grass pink orchid on the right, which is an exploitably vulnerable species like most orchids are in New York State. And I don't have a picture of the Carolina club moss, but I promise you that Lycopodium is in this wetland. So just an example of the type of habitat that needs to be protected. I really struggled with including an aerial that would show you the wetland for this presentation, but because of the fragility of the habitat and the species in there, I erred on the conservative side, and I'm sorry that I can't share more. I do want to talk about what I think are the most important ways to protect wetlands, and this is it. Setbacks, what the linear distance you're going to allow construction to occur from wetlands, whether that's land clearing, allowing building, parking lots, the installation of sanitary systems. And I wish I had more time to talk about buffers, because the importance of buffers can't be emphasized enough, really. There's no one size fits all, both for setbacks and for buffers. The more the better. But the quality of the buffer is going to depend on what it's comprised of and a bunch of other factors, the slope, the amount of runoff, the type of wetland that you're trying to protect, and the species that occupy it. The composition of the vegetation is going to determine its ability to protect that wetland and the vegetation and the wildlife within it. So this is a summary of the town's wetland regulatory program. I'm very excited by the regulatory changes that Kevin spoke about earlier, because they're going to increase the protection for the wetlands that I talked about today, and which are the same wetlands that you've heard in some of the earlier presentations. They need better protection. We've lost a lot. We need to conserve what's left, and that's it. Thank you. If I could make one pitch before you kick me off the stage. The New York State has a wetland forum. They meet upstate every year. It's a great forum. I haven't been there myself in person in a very long time, but I think this is the place to make a pitch for a Long Island wetland forum to discuss some of the conservation issues that are unique to Long Island. We do have issues that mainland upstate New York don't have. We got to remember we are an island, and that does affect wildlife movement on the island. And I would like to see a certification program for using the New York State manual to make sure that all professionals that are delineating wetlands are doing it at a minimum threshold of professionalism. Thanks again.
Great presentation.